So, good morning. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person. I'd like to wish everybody well at this very important conference on demography. Let me begin with a personal memory. In the 1970s, the general attitude in Britain, where I was living at the time, was, oh, there's a world overpopulation, really people are being irresponsible if they're having children. When my youngest daughter was about to be born, there were certainly people who came up to us in the street and said, what do you mean having another child? So things have changed very radically. 30 years on, the generally received attitude is, well, what are we going to do? Not enough children are being born. So it only goes to show that the attitudes to demography and demographics change over time. There's no constant, there's no solidity in this. It's a fluid situation, which in a way I think is right, because I think that's true of all the human sciences, and demography is one of these. Now, the fear of global overpopulation, of course, is still there. It's still a reality, so it's really Europe against the rest of the world, or in contrast to the rest of the world. There's no question that once a population achieves a certain standard of living, then there tends to be, it's a secular trend actually, a decline in the number of children per woman born. And they generally fall below the reproduction rate, which is 2.14. This is Europe today. It can be replaced by migration, and I'll deal with migration in a second. But it's a very interesting question. Are there instruments to ensure that a population does reproduce itself? And then we get into natalist policies, incentives, and so on. The evidence that they work is still to some extent unclear. In Estonia, they have quite interesting incentives. It sort of stopped the radical decline, but I'm not sure that they're anywhere near reaching the reproduction rate of 2.14. Now, if we accept that there is an aging of the population of Europe, which is not true of the rest of the world, that has had a very interesting impact in terms of the impact of the global labor market on Europe, which is that there are sections of the global population which have Europe's labor skills. There's a global labor market in the context of which a significant section of the European labor force is sufficiently skilled or semi-skilled, but actually is too costly. And what I'm referring to in concrete terms is that things are manufactured much more cheaply in China or Brazil or other countries, the consequence of which is that a significant section of the European labor force is effectively priced out of the market. Now, if you're an economist, you say, well, that's the way it goes. Market does that kind of thing. If you're not an economist and you actually think about the human beings who are involved, you find this is a very difficult situation. How do you ensure that people have their rights as citizens, which I think includes something of a right to be employed? There is no solution to this, except that arguably there's a trend, but as I say, the trends in demographics are always uncertain, that gradually over time, over the next 30 years, conceivably, the global overpopulation, that's to say, over-large labour market, will slow down and conceivably turn round. Now that has interesting implications if indeed this is what comes to happen. At the moment, capital is unquestionably stronger than labour. What happens if there's a shortage of labour? Capital at that point, I think, finds itself in balance, and then I think the kinds of payments which will be made to the labour force will increase. But that's not today, that's certainly some years ahead. But what the implication is that what we're living through today, what I've been sketching, is temporary. It's a blip, and it will change, and it will go back to what has been previously. There is a labour shortage rather than an oversupply of labour globally, which of course has important implications for Europe as well. And in terms of Europe, one of the things that I think we have to confront is we have to continuously upgrade the levels of skills that our population has, which means investing in education, especially higher education. There's a perpetual shortage of IT technologists. We have to import these from other parts of the world. And I think it is arguable that Europe could do a great deal better in this. We do have a digital future to look forward to. And this is the area that I want to move on to next. Now, I'm no specialist in this, but what I'm told is that in today, people living in their, let's say, in their 20s and 30s are quite likely to live until they're 130. In other words, even in my time, the population has aged. By now, age of death in Europe, by and large, Russia is a different kettle of fish, is sort of around 70, 75, a little higher for women than it is for men. Now, think about the implications of these changes, these improvements in biotechnology, that people live to the age of 130. What kind of a labor force, what kind of a society are we looking at when a significant section of the population will be over 75? Nobody's really thought about this. Certainly I haven't seen anything, but I think that quite arguably, what we're living at the moment is the enormous emphasis on youth. Just look around you. It's a good thing to be young. Well, I'm not that young anymore, but it means the implication is that dynamism and innovation come from youth. Now, what happens if the weight of society is in the over 70s? I think that's something we have to think through. And there is a second aspect to this. This is the digital future, robotics. In the coming years, robots, digital machines will be able to do, are already able to do, a large number of repetitive jobs. And that includes fairly highly skilled intellectual jobs, like reading documents, legal documents, medical documents, issues of this kind. Because the level of skills in robots, in electronic, artificial intelligence, is moving up all the time. What happens to these people who have hitherto made very good living as a doctor or as a lawyer? What kind of work will they do? The paralegals, will there still be any need for them? Questions of this kind. We haven't really started to think these through. So the digital future has implications well beyond the actual immediate impact that robots, electronic machines, and also the surveillance dimension of it, which I only want to mention. Finally, a few words about migration. Now, we are in the midst of a migration crisis, I think everybody agrees, and we haven't the slightest idea of how to deal with this. There are questions raised by very large numbers of people coming in a very short space of time with a critical mass coming into Europe, coming primarily from the Middle East and from sub-Saharan Africa. The questions that I want to raise, to which I can't give a clear answer, is to what extent can this newly arrived migrant population be integrated into the European labour market, into European society? These are not the same thing. Just because somebody is integrated into the labour market, it doesn't mean they're integrated into society as such. Can they be integrated into European concepts of, let's say, citizenship, European concepts of solidarity, issues of this kind? Secondly, do these migrants have the skills? The general assumption, especially among economists, is, oh, excellent, the migrants are coming, they will replace the aging European population. I think that's too simplistic an assumption in the way that I've already sketched it. We know, at least, so the German Minister of Interior, Thomas de Maizière, has said, so I assume he knows, that anything up to 20% of the migrants are illiterate. Now, it seems to me that it's impossible to be integrated into the European labour market if you can't read and write. Even as a street sweeper, let's say hypothetically, you need something like some reading and writing skills to be able to do the job properly. Think of all the forms that you have to fill in terms of social security and issues of this kind. Secondly or thirdly, will these migrants be in the right place? Will they be in the places where they are needed? And lastly, are they actually ready? And this is the difficult one, to start at the bottom. We've heard a great deal about the Syrians who are coming, so many of them are brain surgeons. I'm not so sure that there's really room for that many brain surgeons in Europe. IT people, I think, certainly yes, but I think that's a general experience of migrants is that they start at the bottom. I'm not sure that they're ready to do that, which I think will lead to tension, it will lead to conflict, and indeed, if we do see the rise of new parallel societies, some of the urban areas of Europe will become very, very tense indeed. It may be that we're already seeing this in places like Malmö, some parts of London, some parts of Vienna, where there are actually parallel societies which don't integrate, they don't talk to each other. So let me end with that. It seems to me that demographics is a subject which I think requires a great deal of thought, a great deal of input, because it impacts on all of us, those who are alive today and also on those who will be born in the next 30 years. Thank you for your attention.